Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much to Jessica for navigating all the technology this weekend. And what a way to end with Bob Spring here. I'm sure he needs no introduction, as I think he knows everyone, but he's been the professor at Arizona State University since 1988. And we brought him on to talk about his commissions, which he has had many, many, as you'll see from the article. So I guess we should just start with what inspired you to commission new music, Bob?
Hi, Kelly. Um, in all fairness and in all openness, Kelly was one of my doctoral students and master's students, so I've known her for a really long time. Not to say you're old, but yeah. When I first started teaching, I was really young. I got my first college job at Albion College in Michigan, Albion, Michigan, when I was 23. And when I was 24, I got a job at Morningside College in Sioux City, Iowa. Now, this was before you needed to have a doctorate to do this. I just had a master's degree then. And the thing was, when I got to Iowa, this was just at the very end of the Jaime Voxman time. And Joe Christensen was at Iowa State, and a guy named Jack Graham was at the University of Northern Iowa. And the people, Sioux City is way on the western side of the state. And the people in South Dakota and South Dakota State were strong teachers. So there was a lot of competition for students. So I was trying to figure out what I could do and what I could do to be known. It wasn't going to be enough just to play Brahms sonatas or Rossini or something like that for people, because they'd heard all that before. And it had to be something that would bring my name to the front of everything. And so I started playing a lot of crazy new music on recitals, and really crazy. I mean, I remember one in I had to learn to double tongue for this. It was in 81, I think. And I did the Passages of the Beast by Morton Subotnick, which the International Clarinet Society was instrumental in commissioning. Anyway, it was a crazy piece with electronics and all this stuff. And my boss at Morningside College said, nobody's going to come to this recital. Well, anyway, the place was packed. And I thought, maybe I'm onto something by doing things that are different than what anybody else could do. So then I started remembering when I first got to Michigan as a freshman in 1973, I had never had like a music history course or anything like that before. And we walked into our first music history class, and it was with a guy named William Malm, M-A-L-M. And we'd all heard that he was kind of crazy. Well, we went into this class, and he walked out on the stage in the recital hall where it was held, and he was wearing his cap and gown. And he said, I'm doing this for two reasons. One, to show you that you, if you work hard enough, can get a doctorate too and be able to wear this academic regalia. And the other is to tell you that I am a specialist, the world's specialist in the music of the Javanese gamelan. And the truth was, he was. He'd written a book about it and all this stuff, and he was. I had no idea what a Javanese gamelan was. I thought it was maybe a tool or something. But anyway, he was talking about this, and he said, and you know why I'm the expert? Because nobody else wants to be. And so I started thinking about, okay, what can I do to be known to do something that other people can't do or don't want to do? And one of the things was new music. And at that point, particularly in Iowa, there was not a lot of new music happening. And when I did these on these recitals, these new pieces, then all of a sudden people started coming. And all of a sudden I started getting students. Now I was there for 6 years, and I was a band director too. And from that period of time, we went from like two clarinets up to a full studio. And it was because I was doing something that nobody else was doing and creating kind of a scene. Well, I moved to West Texas State in 1985, and there were some composers on the faculty there, and they heard me do some of this stuff, and they said, "Can we write something for you?" So that's really what started the ball rolling, was that these composers at West Texas said that they wanted to write pieces for me. When I was doing my doctorate at the University of Michigan, this was back when there were summer programs, and I was there one summer, and there was a percussionist there named Greg Coyle, and he said, "Can I write you a piece?" And all of a sudden, things started happening. So essentially, to start with, it was just necessity was the mother of invention. I had to do something that would set me apart from other people. It was actually just to get students at the beginning. I needed to fill a studio, and I needed to kind of make a name for myself. So I found other composers along the way, and I always felt that it was the best thing to do to start with is to start with your friends. So make friends with the composers in your faculty, and then say, would you be interested in writing a piece for me? 9 times out of 10, they jump at it because first of all, if they're on your faculty, they also have to do a review every year, and this shows creative activity. And secondly, I played a lot of these pieces at Clarinet Fest, and in doing that, you're giving them international exposure, and that's really good for them. And it also helps in terms of other people might buy it or whatever. So when I started getting involved in the Clarinet Association, it was I'd gone to things before, but my real actual involvement started when I moved to West Texas, and Chuck West asked me to play at his conference in Richmond, Virginia. That the very first year I was there, and it was actually just somebody else canceled, and I got to fill in, so it was total luck. But I played a piece that was by Russell Reapy called Three Studies on Flight, and it's just this 8-minute piece, but it has a whole bunch of double tonguing in it. And so all of a sudden, people heard that you could double tongue. And so after that concert, a whole bunch of composers came up and said, "Can I write you a piece?" And it started evolving more and more and more. Then at a certain time, other groups would ask if they could write a piece and have me premiere it. So that's where the Shickley Concerto came from. Was when I was playing in the Pro Musica Chamber Orchestra, and they wanted to commission a composer to write a concerto for me, and Peter Shickley was in town and in Phoenix and doing one of his shows as PDQ Bach. So I went downtown to it was the Crown Plaza Hotel, and our conductor of Pro Musica, Tim Russell, went with me, and we went down and we had a meeting with Peter, and he said, "Well, I don't know you. Can you tell me what kind of stuff you can do?" So I gave him a Joan Tower CD. I gave him a Dragon's Tongue CD, and I just finished a Tarantelle CD. I gave him that stuff, and all of a sudden we got this concerto that was full of this circular breathing, double tonguing craziness. But it ended up being a Peter Shickley wrote a piece for me. That was another one that's kind of along those lines. Was in 1995. When I left West Texas to move to Arizona in '88. One of the people that they interviewed for the job, believe it or not, was Eric Mandat. And Eric didn't get the job, but when he came to audition, he played a little bit of folk songs. And I absolutely, I had never heard anything like that before. And I said, I have to get a piece out of this guy. A funny aside to that was the next year he played folk songs on an 8:30 in the morning potpourri concert in Minneapolis at the Clarinet Convention, and it was really early, and it was a really dark auditorium, and I'd convinced everybody to go, and they're all looking at me like, "This better be good, Springer, you're dead." And he played it, and you could have heard a pin drop. It was just unbelievable. So he came when I hosted the Clarinet Convention in 1995, and I kept at him, "Would you write me a piece? Would you write me a piece?" And so finally, it was the night of our barbecue. And Eric says I don't tell this story right, but I think I do. I got him good and drunk and asked him if he would write me a piece. And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Well, now how much?" And he said, "How much is in your wallet?" And I said, $75. And he said, "That's fine." So that's how I got subtrains out of him. So it was the inspiration to start doing it was actually just so I could get students at the beginning, because there was just, I was 24. Who wants to study with a 24-year-old? They don't know me. And especially when Kelly, when the other side of the state, you got Jaime Voxman and Joe Christensen at Iowa State. He was one of the presidents of Clarinet Work, or one of the officers of Clarinet Work, and was one of the officers when they actually put the two organizations back together, when Chuck West and John Mohler were instrumental in that. And he was a great teacher. And then this guy, Jack Graham at the University of Northern Iowa, he had by far one of the most beautiful clarinet sounds you'd ever hear. And they all had full studios. And here I am, little Bobby Spring, teaching in Sioux City, Iowa. And what am I going to do? I had to do something to get some students. And that was the way I did it.
Love it.
That's kind of a long-winded answer. I'm sorry. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, too. That was 10 minutes.
It's a great answer. Okay. So I know you commissioned many, many pieces, and we've put a partial list up on the website, but there have been more since that document was written, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So many, many pieces. Are there any commission works that were especially hard to learn or that you had a memory of at the premiere that really stand out to you?
Yeah. There's one in particular, but there's some others that fall into the category. The one would be Eric Mandat's Subtrains of Stratospheres. So I kept waiting for it after 1995. I kept waiting for the piece and waiting for the piece, and finally, I think it was in March. He sent me these. I was going to play at the Clarinet Convention in Paris in the summer of '96. So finally, in March, I think it was, I got some diagrams of things he was going to think of writing, and so I started learning them, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. Now, for those of you who know the piece, what I essentially got was the opening slow section before it starts going all crazy. I thought, oh, I could do this. This is really cool. And so I learned it, and I thought, wow, that's just really great. And then about 8 weeks before the conference, I got the rest of the piece. And it's got circular breathing, double tonguing, improvisation. You go on one time, you go on for like 3 pages without a breath, and it goes from a low E to a high C. It's multiphonics that are almost impossible. The whole piece was almost impossible. So I remember sitting in my house here in the office where I'm sitting now, and I would practice it and practice it. I mean, like in the morning hours, going over this piece and going very slowly and trying to learn all these magic fingerings he had. And then I would take a break and do something else in the afternoon, and then I would come back that night and look at it and think, I've ever practiced this before? This doesn't look familiar at all. So I went, and it took forever. It took the whole 8 weeks. And I was teaching at Domaine Forget back then. And every morning I would get up early and I would go down to the room where we taught, Marie Picard and I taught, and I would practice that piece. And whenever the students came in, I would play that section for them that I learned, and I would play it up to tempo and everything. And as soon as you have somebody looking over your shoulder, you forget every fingering and you have to start over again. So oh my goodness gracious. So we got to Paris, and I had this, I created this kind of a calendar of where I was going to be in terms of tempos along the way. And it was, I didn't hit the target tempo until the day of the performance. And I was never so scared in my life. And I thought, what am I going to do if I forget all these fingerings? And only one performance did that happen, by the way. I was teaching in Interlaken one summer, and we did this little faculty recital, and I got to one page, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I forgot all the fingerings, and I forgot every fingering. And I actually just made up a whole bunch of stuff till I got down to the bottom, and then I remembered where I was. But the performance went really well in Paris. In fact, it was a really moving time for me, because it was when Bill Smith was there, and afterward he came up and hugged me and he said, "I'm not afraid of where new music is going anymore." And I thought that was really cool. I mean, and so that actually takes me to another composer. Bill Smith ended up being a wonderful friend of mine. In fact, when he passed away, I got one of his clarinets, and it's one of the 2 clarinets that he had buffet build that doesn't have the upper tone holes bored out, so you can play it with this hand when you're playing the other clarinet with your left hand. And he has a couple of extra fingers and extensions on it, the keys and extensions. And with Bill's humor, when he gave it to me, it says on the front of it in his writing, "For Bob Spring, Selmer clarinet." And Buffet made it for him. And the whole thing was, he knew I had switched over from Buffet to Selmer, and he wanted me to think that I actually had got a Selmer clarinet. Bill was visiting Phoenix once, and he wanted to go out and see what the desert was like. So I drove him out to one of the reservoirs in the Superstition Mountains. And we were driving out there, and we're talking about all the pieces that I'd had written for me. And he got really quiet. And he said, you've never asked me to write a piece for you. And I said, well, you're William O. Smith. I mean, and he said, I'd love to write a piece for you. So I ended up getting 2 pieces out of him. One is called Epigrams, and it's spectacular. It's 6 movements. The first movement is the entire clarinet. The second movement is the top half of the clarinet. The third movement is the entire clarinet. The fourth movement is the bottom half of the clarinet. The fifth movement is the entire clarinet, and the sixth movement is the top half and the bottom half played at the same time. And the other one he wrote for Janice Starling and me, and it was for just two duets for 2 people playing 2 clarinets at the same time. And Jan and I recorded all these about a decade ago, and I gave up on CDs, getting CDs out, because nobody even has a CD player anymore. And I've got like 2,500 in this room. So anyway, but at some point this next several months, I'm going to release that on a digital format, and also some hard copy of us playing these pieces, because they really are pretty incredible. It was just like, and then with Bill writing me those 2 pieces, I mean, I remember thinking, I can't afford him. I mean, he's going to want thousands and thousands of dollars. And so as we're driving back, I said, how much do you want? And he said, well, I don't know. I like Cold Stone Creamery. Let's get some ice cream. And then I ended up paying him, I don't remember, like $500 or $700 per piece. And it was just unbelievable.
Wow. Oh, that's really cool. So I know you have a lot of students that like to commission new music, and what do you tell them? And what do you advise to people who are starting out and who are interested in going into this field as well?
Yeah, there are a bunch of my doctoral students and younger ones as well have been doing a lot of commissioning. And I think the big reason that it started was because I was doing it and they thought it was really cool to get a new piece. But then they also found that for doctoral projects at ASU, they have to do a project. It's called a research paper. It's not a dissertation anymore. And so they found that they could do a research paper, and the recording, if they commissioned some pieces, the recording would actually count as the dissertation portion of it. And then the research paper would be just research about, like, a performer's guide or something like that. So a whole lot of them started doing recordings of new pieces. And so it started out with, I think, a way to get around the system of having to write a paper on something they didn't want to write a paper on. But they ended up getting some really, really neat pieces out of it. And part of it, I think, was we talked about going to find somebody, like a friend or whatever, on there's the big program here in composition, and go to a composition student, go to a composition student recital, and when you hear a piece you really like, then say, wow, I like that, let me talk to that composer. I did that with a piece that was for clarinet, 2 percussionists, and dancer, that was written for me a few years ago, and I don't think it's on that list. That's one that I couldn't find on there. And it was just, I went to a new music ensemble concert, and she was a composer, and she'd written a piece, and I thought, this is really cool. So I asked her if she'd write a piece for me with dancers, and it was just amazing. But yeah, just find a composer that you like. I want to go back a question real quick, and then I'll come back to this one. Another piece that was just amazing, and it's only been played twice, and it was by a composer who was on our faculty for a short period of time, and she moved away. It was well, anyway, it doesn't matter why, but she moved away. Her name was Korika Suzuki, and she wrote a piece for me that involved amplification, video, audio, and movement choreography. And I played it at the Clarinet Convention in Belgium, and it was really incredible. I loved doing it. Then we decided to do it on the ASU campus, and I showed up, and she had a set that I had to go through and everything. And I remember thinking, I have to be careful where my pickup wire goes. So my friend JB Smith said, I have a wireless pickup for you. So it's this thing that you put on your belt, and I could walk through everything. but that was another one that was really bizarre because she started changing things. The recital was Sunday afternoon. Sunday morning, she started changing things. That was really frightening. The other one that used to do that all the time was Rodney Rogers, who would get into a recording session and all of a sudden he'd say, "Can you change that to a D?" So with the students commissioning things, they're also getting into social things, social ideas. I have some students who got pieces written by marginalized composers. Some were all from LBGTQ plus. I hope I got all the letters in there, of everything, and all the composers from that area. So, and I think that's wonderful, and they're expressing their own thoughts and everything. The other two that have really taken this to the extreme, and you just heard one in the last session before this, are Josh and Stephanie Gardner, who were my students, and they together are commissioning all sorts of pieces, and they're going after, like I tried to do, they're going after some big name people and getting some really good music out of that, and they're taking it to the next level, which is what a lot of the students are doing now. I mean, we released CDs. I mean, I produced for you. I know what we do. You know, we released recordings on little things, and they're now making videos of everything, and I don't even understand it. So it's all pretty cool what Josh and Stephanie are doing, not only doing the recording, but also doing the video along with it. And I just think it's taking it to another level, and what we probably are going to have to do to keep going with music development in the future. I think that people have very small attention spans now. And it used to be that cartoons would change with kids every 7 seconds, and now it's done. I think I read somewhere 2 seconds, everything changes, maximum of 2 seconds. And so attention spans are shorter, and I think we're going to have to do things to, I don't think audio alone is something that's going to keep people. I think we're going to have other concepts involved. Did I cover all your questions?
You did. And I was actually going to follow up with what trends do you see, and you segued right in.
You know, I was talking to Jerry Arante at the Clarinet Convention last summer, and Jerry, who is also a past president of ICA, he was on the board with me, and Jerry went to Michigan. He's actually one of my favorite people in the world. I remember going and listening to him play, and he was so creative, and so creatively going out of the box and trying to figure new things. And he and I did a whole bunch of clarinet days together at one point, particularly in China, and he was so wonderful to be with. And I remember going on a trip with him once. It was supposed to be a 2-hour trip, which ended up being all day, up to this lake in northern China that they consider a holy spot, and coming back down. And at one point I said, Jerry, where do you see music going in the future? And here's Jerry Arante, who did all this electronic stuff and all this other stuff, and he said, maybe just playing a beautiful melody. So I think we've gotten back a little bit to the point where we're actually into tonality and beauty. And I don't think before it was necessarily ugly. It was just we were looking for different things. And a lot of the pieces that my students are having commissioned now are just beautiful. There's beautiful pieces that I find to be really mesmerizing to listen to. One of the students had a piece written for clarinet and organ, and it's somewhat religious, which he's not necessarily, but I think it had to do with his upbringing in the Southern Baptist Church and his own sexuality and everything. And the piece is beautiful. And I think, wow, that'd be something, if I could play with an organ on a regular basis, that would be something I would want to do.
Very cool. Were there any questions? I have
Well,
one. I was just going to ask if you're going to keep commissioning.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I'm retiring at the end of this year from Arizona State, and that doesn't mean, as a matter of fact, I'm sitting in my office now, and I've been practicing all day while I've been watching all this stuff. I don't want to sit there, but yeah, I want to keep doing things for a while. The bad thing is just going to be able to find places to do this. And luckily, I go to an Episcopal church in downtown Phoenix that has a music program, a very large community concert series thing, so I can continue to do things there. But yeah, I'm going to keep going. I have one piece that I just commissioned. I was supposed to play it on a recital, a month ago. And as some people know, my students know, a year I had a small stroke, and it affected my ability to play for a while completely. But now the only problem now is that the endurance becomes a problem, and I had to not play that piece, and so I need to do that one. It's by Paco de Ava, and he wrote a piece called Buttery Chardonnay, which is a play on things, because that's what I always order in a restaurant, a buttery Chardonnay. It's for clarinet being played with your left hand and with your right hand doing the thing where you're going like this on the top of three wine glasses that all have different pitches. 4 wine glasses. Sorry, Paco. And I need to play that. It was too much for that particular day. But yeah, I want to stay active. I mean, I can't really see myself doing anything else. I've been doing this for 46 years, and I don't know. I don't have anything else to do. I don't like golf. I really hate fishing. I love to travel, but if my wife and I spend too much time with each other, we're going to kill each other. So I want to make sure there's something. John Mohler gave me some advice. He said, when you retire, you can sell your clarinets, but keep the case. I said, why? And he said, so you can say, when you're really tired of the house, you can say, honey, I have to go out. I have a rehearsal tonight. So, yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I think it's just been, it's been a glorious kind of a trip, and making something from nothing has been kind of a really glorious thing to do, to go where there was never a piece before and talk to a composer and say, would you write me a piece? And then getting the piece and then working the piece up and then performing the piece and sometimes recording the piece. And all of a sudden you hear, wow, these things, you did that. I mean, I did that. You did that on a number of pieces. I mean, you create something. And I think creation is what we're all trying to do anyway. We're all trying to be creative. That's it.
Jessica, did you want to ask anything? Are we done?
Well, I was just curious, Bob, and I think many people probably thought this during Elsa's session. She talked about the back and forth between her and Walter and the members of the trio and the composers, and how sometimes there was a lot of that, and sometimes it was just like, here's a piece, just play it. And I wonder, because a lot of people were approaching you and you were sort of leading the way with the techniques that you were showing off, and were they approaching you with the mindset of, I'm going to pick his brain and learn how to write for these techniques and incorporate them into my compositional style, or did they just hand you music? What was the more frequent thing that happened to you?
It depended on what they were. If they were a clarinetist, they would approach me and say, what's possible? And I had one piece written with a bunch of multiphonics by somebody who wasn't a clarinetist, and the multiphonics wouldn't work. And he said, well, Raphael built a book, said they would. No, it didn't work. And the back and forth thing really happened. I loved that session, and I love Elsa. She always says I was her student, but I never was. But we did a lot of stuff together, and I really love Elsa and Walter. But there was, when I was working with J.B. Smith, the percussionist who's now retired and moved to Australia, we had a number of pieces written for us that the percussion parts were impossible. And so he would go back. One was Eric Mandat, and he went back to him and said, look, this is not possible, but if you do this, it'll work. So the back and forth, yeah. And the last piece that one of our composers on campus wrote for me, Rodney Rogers, wrote a concerto, and he and I had a huge back and forth, which ended up in a fight. I mean, like a yelling match, because it was so high and jumped around so much. And I made the mistake of saying, I bet it sounded great on the computer. And then it didn't go over very well. But that's it. I'm done.
Well, one more thing. Do you have any advice for when you run into that situation where something is just not physically possible, or the composer may have overestimated what is physically possible for the majority of clarinet players? And especially in the commissioning process, when you're excel at a specific technique and people are pushing the boundaries and you can play it, but if you want the work to have lasting appeal and be performed more often, you have to really keep in mind the skill of the average player or the people who are behind the leader, like you were so often.
I actually used that line on a number of people, and it was a line that JB and I started using, saying this is a tenure piece. It was written to give somebody tenure, but nobody's ever going to play it again because it's not playable. So I've talked to a lot of composers and said, this is really great, but you need to write an OSIA part, or you need to rethink what you're doing on this if you want the piece played again. A lot of the stuff that I was doing back then is now almost considered the norm. I mean, and so that's evolved. But yeah, I had to talk to people a lot and say, if you want this piece played again, you might want to reconsider this. And they always did. I never had anybody, composers want their music to be played. Nobody ever said, no, that's the germ of the whole thing. They were.
That's great advice. And I am going to drop this link in the chat one more time. If you hadn't taken a look at this list that Kelly shared earlier and we talked about it, please do. I obviously encourage you to look at these pieces that Bob has worked with composers to commission and that were written for him. They are exceptional. Many of them are worth your time. And I can't thank everybody enough for attending our sessions. If you join late or if you missed anything, everything will be available to you on YouTube for post viewing. And we're really, really grateful again to the ICA New Music Committee for organizing this wonderful event. Yeah. Thanks to Bob and Kelly for closing us out. And we wish you a great fall, and we will see you at a future ICA event. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody. Bye.